You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, it's your most authoritative news analysis show. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. This show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN. Welcome to the new world, Star Assurance, creating smiles since 1985, having mosquito coil pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. ACAP compost fertilizer, truly natural fertilizer that you need. White Temple Agency, a luxury you can afford. Any sort of tiles that you're looking for, and the best, that's where you get them. Ines Fly for a pest-free life, and Royal Lighting, walk in the light. Now, today I'm unable to do my take, and in place of that, I have a letter from the Speaker of Parliament, Edward Do Ajaho, and he has a ruling to make on the show this morning. So let's read him. He says, "Dear Editor, Newsfile Program, Multimedia Limited, Accra, Rejoinder," and the title is Remarks by Mr. Ayikwe-Otu and Mr. Samuel in Team Dakwa on Multimedia Newsfile Program, and reported in the Chronicle in respect of the decision of Mr. Speaker on the 1st of September 2016 by the Speaker of Parliament, Right Honourable Edward Do Ajaho, on the motion requesting the establishment of a special committee to investigate the donation of a Ford Expedition vehicle to His Excellency the President by a Burkinabe contractor. That's just the headline. Now he says, the attention of the office of the Speaker of Parliament has been drawn to remarks and comments made by Mr. Ayikwe-Otu, former Attorney General and Minister of Justice, and Mr. Samuel Intim Dakwa, former clerk to Parliament, on the decision by the Speaker of Parliament, Right Honourable Edward Do Ajaho, in respect of the motion filed by the Minority Leader on behalf of the Minority Caucus in Parliament requesting the establishment of a special committee to investigate the donation of a Ford Expedition vehicle to His Excellency the President by a Burkinabe contractor. The said remarks were made during Saturday, 3rd September 2016 edition of the Multimedia Newsfile Program, part of which was reported in the Monday, 5th September 2016 edition of the Chronicle, volume 24, number 153. According to the Chronicle report, Mr. Ayikwe-Otu claimed, quote, the Speaker overruled on the test case of The Speaker over-relied on the test case of Messrs. Okujeto Ablakwa and Dr. Omani Boama versus Jacob Otanka Obechebi Lamte, and that the minority did not get justice. The decision delivered by the Speaker, from the decision delivered by the Speaker. In arriving at this conclusion, Mr. Ayikwe-Otu relied on the premise which he expressed boldly during the Newsfile program that, quote, the issue about the Ford Expedition gift to President Mahama was contained in the Auditor General's report, unquote. Mr. Ayikwe-Otu argued further that, quote, there was no pronouncement on Article 187, Clause 6 of the same 1992 Constitution, which clothed Parliament with powers to investigate issues arising out of the Auditor General's report. The said article reads, Parliament shall debate the report of the Auditor General and appoint, where necessary, in the public interest, a committee to deal with any matters arising from it, unquote. Mr. Ayikwe-Otu, the Chronicle report continued, stated that he, quote, was surprised that Speaker Ajaho decided to overlook this provision and instead concentrated on the work being done by Shraj, unquote. Ordinarily, in consonance with our democratic values and culture, the office of the Speaker of Parliament would not have responded to opinions expressed by individuals or groups during media discussions. Whether adverse or favorable, we are constrained, however, in this instance, to intervene to set the record straight and forestall further misleading of the public. First of all, given the stature in society and pedigree of Mr. Aikoto as former Attorney General and Minister for Justice. It is critical we correct factual inaccuracies and clear untruths he peddled about Parliament and the Speaker to the unsuspecting public, particularly when his statements were being transmitted through a worldwide media outlets such as the multimedia Newsfile program and reinforced by the report in the Chronicle. The Office of the Speaker hereby states expressly and unequivocally that there has been no mention of the issue of a Ford expedition vehicle in any of the Auditor General's reports submitted to the House since the inception of the Fourth Republican Parliament in January 1993. He continues, the former Attorney General failed to exercise the diligence required of a professional lawyer by first cross-checking his facts with the appropriate institutions through simple verification from the clerk's office or the table office or the secretariat of the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, or by just contacting the Office of the Auditor General before going on air to spew such untruths. The Office of the Speaker is particularly surprised that the former Attorney General also ignored the relatively easy public access to virtually all the reports of the Auditor General published so far, which are available for download to any interested person free of charge on the official website of the Ghana Audit Service, but rather came on the Newsfile program to boldly assert that, quote, the issue about the Ford expedition gift to the President Mahama was contained in the Auditor General's report, unquote. Assuming without admitting that it was indeed the case that the issue of the Ford expedition vehicle was before Parliament, by the rules of the House, the matter would have been referred to the Public Accounts Committee for consideration and report. What would then have been the rationale for minority parties' request that Parliament be recalled out of recess to establish another committee to investigate the same matter being scrutinized by the Public Accounts Committee, which under our parliamentary rules is chaired by a member of the minority party in Parliament? Why would they not wait for the report of the Public Accounts Committee to come to the plenary for debate? Our chief concern is that his statement on the matter in respect of the actions of the Speaker and Parliament are likely to confuse and even mislead many Ghanaians who might be looking up to him for guidance on matters of law and fact. Mr. Aikoto must be called upon by the host of the multimedia Newsfile program to retract his statement relating to the Speaker's decision on the issue of the Ford expedition vehicle, since they were based on erroneous and inaccurate facts. We are also equally concerned that the host of the multimedia Newsfile program provided Mr. Aikoto with a worldwide platform and allowed him a free rein to mislead the listening public without demanding that he proved his source by showing them the copy of the Auditor General reports he was purportedly relying on. It is our humble view that the multimedia group has a duty and an ethical responsibility that persons who appear on their platform are not permitted to articulate issues without proving sources, particularly when the persons against whom they raise adverse matters are not present immediately to respond to them. Secondly, our information from a news report in the Monday, 5th September 2016 edition of the Ghanaian Times newspaper, number 17847, which was culled from the website myjoyonline.com, is that Mr. Samuel Intim Dakwa, a former clerk to Parliament, also contributed on the Multimedia Newsfile program as an expert on parliamentary procedures and claimed that, quote, the Speaker may have erred in his summary dismissal of the motion, unquote. He argued that, quote, Parliament is not only the highest institution responsible for making laws, but the highest forum to debate matters, and the least the Speaker could do was to allow a debate on the matter before ruling, unquote. In July 2005, the then Minority Caucus filed a motion requesting Parliament to establish a special committee to investigate His Excellency the President on what was termed the Hotel Kufuor saga. Speaker Ebenezer Bawumia Hughes promptly declined to admit the motion and dismissed it summarily. Accordingly, it was neither referred to the Business Committee nor programmed for debate in the House. At the time, which was some 10 years after his retirement, Mr. S.N. Dakwa had been appointed and was serving as consultant and advisor on procedural matters to Parliament and to the Right Honourable Speaker Ebenezer Bawumia Hughes. This was during the fifth Parliament of the Fourth Republic, which spanned from January 2005 to January 2009. Getting to conclude, right? Interestingly, Mr. S.N. Dakwa was unable to advise Speaker Sechi Hughes not to dismiss the motion summarily and to allow debate on the Hotel Kufuor saga before ruling on the matter. Surprisingly also, Mr. S.N. Dakwa could not at the time find a similar worldwide multimedia platform to go and offer his, quote, expert opinion, unquote, on the ruling of the Speaker on the Hotel Kufuor saga. Not surprisingly, he has now found his voice after so many years. We do not begrudge Mr. Dakwa for expressing his personal opinion on what occurred in Parliament relating to the Right Honourable Speaker Edo Ajaho's decision on the matter of the Ford Expedition vehicle. Obviously, unlike the professional lawyers on the panel, it would appear that the boundaries and constraints on decision-making imposed on the Ghana Parliament by the 1992 Constitution, to which it is subject, were lost on Mr. S.N. Dakwa. He was unable to appreciate fully the binding effect of the ruling that Shraj had exclusive jurisdiction on matters relating to conflict of interest and the code of conduct for public officers delivered by the Supreme Court in the case of Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa and Dr. Eduardo Mahama-Bawumia versus Jacob Echebilamte and the Attorney General. The very last paragraph says, in order to distinguish partisans in expert clothing from the real, it is important that hosts of media programs ask persons professing to be experts whether there had been any precedent in respect of matters under discussion, and if any, what was their expert opinion at the time. This is signed by George Opata, Special Assistant to the Speaker, Parliament House, Accra, dated 8 September 2016. Thank you. I have read your rejoinder in full, but one thing I must tell you is that you did not have to rely on the Chronicle and what was published elsewhere to send me a rejoinder. You ought to have listened to what happened on this platform. The claims you make of the S.N. Dakwa, for example, start with Ayikwe Otu, that he made the claims of the Auditor General's report that the Ford Expedition issue was in the Auditor General's report and that the host sat and watched him to continue is very wrong. It is a lie, because I put it to Ayikwe Otu on this show that it was not in the Auditor General's report. Please get a copy of last week's program and watch that content for yourself. S.N. Dakwa, you say he was not asked of precedents. He was referred to as many as 3 or 4 precedents on the issue. And he was asked why he didn't, for example, advise D.F. Annan on a similar situation. He said he was out of the country when he returned. D.F. Annan sought his view, and he told D.F. Annan his opinion, that D.F. Annan could have allowed the debate. D.F. Annan heard him, but didn't take what he had to share, because he was not obliged. So thank you very much. Your rejoinder fully issued, but please rely on the content of this show and not what's published by others. Limit yourself to that. It doesn't help. Thank you very much. Now, let's get to doing some economics and some election issues and ECG. And you should get ready to enjoy the show. My guest on the show this morning, Dr. Eric Osei Asibe, is senior economist. He lectures at the Department of Economics, and he's the acting head of the Department of Distance Education at the University of Ghana. Good morning and welcome, Doc.
Good morning.
Also is Ebo Duncan.
No.
Eko Duncan, sorry. Eko Duncan. Eko Duncan is chairman, Political Affairs Committee, Convention People's Party, the CPP. Mr. Duncan, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning and thank you.
Also on the show, and you can see I'm smiling, because when he came in, I was asking whether I was in the wrong seat. Kojo Opong Nkrumah is MPP parliamentary candidate for the Ofuase Ayerebi constituency. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm good, sir. Isaac Adongo is NDC parliamentary candidate for Bolga Central. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
Great to have all of you. So, your views, your comments, your questions are welcome on the show. 1422 is a text line. You can also send them to 1760 and we'll share them with the rest of the world. And when I say that, I give the credit to Kojo Nkrumah, rest of the world. Now, this show is live from Joy 99.7 FM on the Joy channel, also on the multi-TV, and it's available subsequently in London and elsewhere in Europe on your Sky television, and that's your Sky channel 235. We are also on DSTV, and you can watch us on your DSTV channel 421. We are on over a dozen affiliate stations across the country, and we are streaming on the internet as well. Thanks for joining us again this morning. Now, I think I'll like to start with Kojo on the issue of Dr. Bawumia and his lecture on whether or not the country had built a foundation, and whether it was, whatever foundation it was, whether it was the foundation of straw or of concrete. And he came to the conclusion that this was a foundation of straw. I think what I'd rather do now is listen to bits of what he did, and we'll come to Kojo to justify, because those claims are being questioned, including by Imani Ghana.
The country's debt to GDP ratio had declined from 189% in 2000 to 32% of GDP by 2008. Indeed, from independence in 1957 to 2008, Ghana's total debt was 9.5 billion Ghana cedis. However, in the last 7 years alone, under this NDC government, Ghana's total debt has ballooned from 9.5 billion Ghana cedis to 100 billion Ghana cedis in 2015, and 105 billion Ghana cedis by May 2016. 66% of Ghana's debt from independence, 66% of Ghana's debt has been accumulated under the presidency of John Dramani Mahama in just the last 3.5 years. During the period of MPP governance, capital expenditure, that is expenditure on infrastructure, far exceeded interest payments. This is because low interest payments allow more room for capital expenditure. Infrastructure expenditure as a percentage of GDP declined sharply after 2008 as interest payments have been increasing. From 2014 to date, interest payments have now incredibly exceeded infrastructure expenditure. How can an economy grow when interest payments are higher than capital expenditure? Under the NDC government over the last 8 years, the minimum wage has declined from $2.12 to $2.02. That is a decline in the minimum wage by 4.6%. Between 2012 and 2016, which is the tenure of President Mahama, the minimum wage in dollar terms has declined by 23%. Another excuse that has been proffered by President Mahama for the miserable performance of the economy under his watch is the 2013 Supreme Court petition. You and I were not there. President Mahama claims that the election petition today, he is claiming that the election petition slowed down the economy. The problem with this desperate argument, however, is that it is contradicted by the data. That's why I like data. That contrary to the claims by the president, except for the fiscal deficit, on virtually every single indicator, such as GDP growth, inflation, exchange rate, exports, Eurobond interest rate, debt to GDP ratio, and so on. Every single indicator. The performance of the economy in 2013 was better than 2014 and 2015. The president's argument, therefore, does not hold water, and the election petition cannot be blamed. The mismanagement of the economy under this John Mahama government has resulted in an increase in taxes on virtually everything taxable. This has increased the burden on the private sector and is a disincentive for production. High taxes also increase the cost of living for Ghanaians. Many of the taxes that have been imposed are nuisance taxes. They are nuisance taxes whose yield is quite low, but whose burden on business and on individuals is quite high.
So those were just a couple of highlights of the statement that Dr. Bawumia gave. Could you?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose and what was he seeking to achieve with this?
So let me start by saying good morning to your viewers and your listeners all over the country and abroad who are listening and watching this morning's show. I would like to start by putting what happened a couple of days ago in context. Dr. Bawumia is an economist. He is a former deputy governor of the central bank. He also happens to be the vice presidential candidate of the MPP as we head into the 2016 elections. If you check the records, he's got over 25 different publications on various economies and on various particular benchmarks. And from time to time, even here in Ghana, he does analysis of various things. But 2 or 3 things happen anytime he does these analysis. First, he will use a particular model or a particular set of formula to arrive at some indicators. And then he will make some analysis out of what the numbers are telling you, because in economics, that's all you do. Whether you use the Keynesian model or the classical model or the neoclassical model, you will come to a certain number. Whatever number you come to is not just for its own sake, but it's supposed to inform a certain analysis that when I look at these numbers I'm arriving at, this is the picture I see, and therefore this is the prescribed solution. So broadly, that's what he's done. Now, in the times when he's done some of these things about Ghana, something has happened. For example, one of the very early ones that he did about the fact that we need to watch expenditure. And he was looking at deficit numbers, nominal deficit numbers. He was looking at deficit to GDP ratios. And was talking about the fact that if we look at the gaps between revenue and expenditure, and the rate at which we are committing to some specific expenditure items, some cost centers, ring fencing them or earmarking them, if we don't take care, we're going to get to a time when government will run out of money to run this economy. So he used some models, he came to some numbers, but the important thing is that the prescription he made was that if you don't watch this, this is going to be the outcome. He was lambasted, he was called all sort of names, that he was dishonest, he was disingenuous, he was being political, he was just doing propaganda. In the end, President Mahama admitted and told us that the meat, and I'm quoting the president, the meat was gone and was now down to the bone. That's what Bawumia was talking about. Dr. Bawumia talked about the fact that the cedi was depreciating at an alarming rate because of a number of things. I have a copy of the presentation that he did on the cedi right here. And he talked about the fact that some of the solutions that were being prescribed by the central bank at the time, if you look at the numbers they were using, that if you want to travel, you need to get about $1,000 here. You look at those specific numbers, he was of the view that those prescriptions were not sustainable and some of them needed to be reversed. Again, he was lambasted. In the end, the central bank had to reverse some of these prescriptions. I'll give you another example. He talked about our deficits again and what it meant again in real numbers. This is post-2012, where we were recording, and depending on the source of data you are looking at, you may say 11.5 or 12.2, but the important thing that's a double-digit deficit. He talked about that and said that two things were going to happen. If we didn't find a very quick way of going into an austerity program to clean it up, we were most likely going to have to go for a bailout somewhere. Again, people took issue with, why are you saying 12.2? It's 11.5. You know, all sort of analysis at the time. But the big thing he was saying that you are suffering a double-digit deficit. Indeed, it was 3 years in a row. And if you don't look at it, this is going to be the outcome. Again, it was lambasted. In the end, we had to go to the IMF for a bailout. He warned again on the IMF bailout that if you take the IMF bailout, I have a copy here for you, the ECF with the IMF, and you look at the structure of the revenue measures, what they call the homegrown policy, the structure of the revenue measures and the structure of the expenditure measures, about 2 or 3 things were going to happen. One, it's going to impose severe hardship on people. If you take measures, and with your permission, if I read just a little bit of some of these measures. For example, we talked about VAT on fee-based financial services. I'm reading from page 50, paragraph 27D.
Which is what he says you will be scrapping.
Well,
yes. You do.
Yes. So you will notice that the solutions that we prescribe at the end are tied to an analysis of the problem. So, for example, he says, if you say that you're going to impose a special petroleum tax of 17.5% as part of the rationalization of VAT and change the petroleum pricing structure to yield 1.4 million to repay part of the money you've taken from the IMF, this has a trickle-down effect. It has a rippling effect because you're talking about petroleum, which affects transportation, which affects inflation and everything. It's a bad idea. It's going to bring hardship. He listed a number of them. We may not have time for me to go through them. In the end, again, he was lambasted. Today, the evidence of on the ground is that there's a lot of hardship. The TUC is just talking about the fact that this deal actually should be scrapped. That's what the TUC is saying, that this deal is bad. Secondly, the IMF itself is saying that some of the numbers that we have presented to them need to be reconciled. I mean, if they're very comfortable with the data the government is presenting, you would notice that in the supplementary budget, there's an interesting matter of a certain 1.7 billion that needs to be talked about. So Dr. Bawumia makes the argument that these things will impose hardship, and in the end, you may not be able to follow through on it. Today, the evidence is out there. Here's the point. Sometimes we pick issue with 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, or he should have used this model. But the big thing he's talking about is the big picture, what you are seeing, and therefore what the prescription is. So what he sought to do 2 days ago was to take a set of figures, a set of, may I say, benchmarks, like the size of the economy, like per capita GDP, like minimum wage in dollar terms, which shows you how a government is empowering its people or equipping its people to compete on the global stage in terms of the minimum wage that has at least been paid, by something as simple as wage inequality reduction. So he took some of these key benchmark areas and he compared 2001 to 2008 and 2009 to 2016. And he comes to the conclusion that looking at the numbers, pure data tells you that the average Ghanaian is worse off today than he was in the 8 years of the NPP, during which period the NPP got about 20 billion Ghana cedis of resources, and the NDC has received about 248 billion Ghana cedis in resources. They got 12 times the resources that the NPP got. You would imagine that at least they should do 12 times better than the NPP did. Have they maintained the status quo? Or have we retrogressed? Or have they added to it? And his analysis at the end of the day is that when you look at these numbers, it's clear to anybody that we are worse off today. The average Ghanaian is worse off today than he was
in the NPP era. And he proceeds to make a further argument that government struggles to reconcile the numbers with the reality on the ground. And so what government keeps saying over and over again is that we are building the foundation. We are building the foundation. And he gave several references from the NDC manifesto prior to the 2012 election to the 2011 period, where President Mahama has consistently talked about building a foundation. And he asked the question, so how many foundations would you build? How long would it take you to build this foundation? Because the foundation that was left with the, was left for the NDC from the onset looked like a good foundation. We had growth at interesting levels. We had interesting levels for our reserves. We had good numbers for the average Ghanaian. So he comes to the conclusion that if we continue on this trajectory, we are going to be in trouble if we keep this resource basket in the hands of the NDC administration. And he concludes by saying that two things need to happen. One, you need to cure this problem by putting this economy back in the hands of a political tradition that has a paradigm which better manages the economy. And he's proven it with the figures. That's one. And two, when you do that, we have a number of policy prescriptions which we will use to cure this problem. And he listed about 17 of them which will be used to cure this problem. So in summary, this is what Dr. Bawumia did, which is not very different from many of the things that he has done in times past. Our hope is that this time round, we will not go back into the same vilification, name-calling, dismissing what he's saying, but we will look at least if for nothing at all, the solutions he's prescribing and ask ourselves, do these solutions work for Ghana? You may be in government today. Pick these solutions and try them. If they work, all of us benefit as a country. That's our sincere hope as we go into this conversation on Dr. Bawumia's paper.
Right. I intend to have each one of you do 10 minutes without any interaction, and you've done 9 minutes. I'd like you to take the last 1 minute to do part of your summary of what he presented on the aspect where he spoke about the worrying trend of debt servicing vis-a-vis infrastructure development. How much has come in and how much we've been able to spend on infrastructure.
So let me quickly try and do that in under 1 minute if I can. You would notice that in 2008, our budget, our stock of debt was about 9.5 billion Ghana cedis. That was about 32% debt to GDP ratio. You recall that when the MPP took government in 2000, debt to GDP ratio was about 182%. Through initiatives like HIPIC, etc., we're able to reduce that to about 32%. What that did for us is that it created fiscal space so that government could now invest in things that create further growth and things that take care of the poor people at the bottom, even though we are a party that is right of center. As at now, when you check our debt stock, it's about 105 billion Ghana cedis, end 2015, about 105 billion Ghana cedis. Today, our calculation is that it's about 71% debt to GDP ratio. Government says it's 63. You let's grant them they are 63. We disagree. We say it's 71. Grant them they are 63. They've moved us back from 32 to 63. And what they've done is that they have cringed fiscal space that you use for investment in some of the initiatives that really create growth, some of the initiatives that alleviate poverty, really. I mean, for example, take things like Kufuor's cocoa spraying, fertilizer, etc. And don't sit in the studios and analyze. Let's go to the villages. From where I come from, go to the villages and talk to the farmers on the ground as to whether or not spraying is going on, the number of gangs have been maintained, fertilizer is being provided. So what you have done is that now the fiscal space is cringed and you don't have enough money to pump in all of these things. Let me give you just some two quick statistics. In 2008, this total debt stock of about 9.5 billion Ghana cedis attracted interest of 680 million Ghana cedis in 2008. Today, when you hit 100 billion plus, you are paying about 9.6 billion as interest, debt servicing actually. 9.6 billion. Now that is more than the total debt stock that you inherited. And here's what it's doing. If you take the top 6 ministries in this country, roads and highways, trade and industry, food and agric, water, resources, works and housing, youth and sports, transport, they are getting a total budgetary allocation of about 2.1 billion. If you are spending, in 2016, we're going to spend 10 billion on debt servicing. What you are doing is that you are eliminating the space that you could have used or the budgets that you could have given to these ministries to really invest in parts of the economy that we believe spur on the growth. And I'll give you one final thing before I keep mute. Let me go to the supplementary budget presented by my good friend Setekbe in Parliament a few weeks ago. And I hear, my friends in the NDC talk about the fact that we should use average GDP growth rates and not the trend. If your camera can zoom in onto Mr. Setekbe's graph as presented in Parliament, it's on page 7. You would notice that we have, GDP growth has moved from 4.8 in 2009 to 7.9 to 14.0 when oil came through. And it's been going down now, 9.3, 7.3, 4.0, 3.9. Now, our friends in the NDC say, oh, don't worry, just put it together and find the average. And you'll notice that it's a higher average than the MPP. When you're looking at GDP growth, one of the questions you want to ask, and the economists are here, they should help us, is what is the trend? What is the rate? Because if the economy is growing at 3.5 per annum, right, and it's just staying there, the economy is growing, but it's growing at a stagnant rate. Okay. But if it's growing at higher rates, then you tell that there's some momentum. In the MPP era, you could tell that there was some momentum in the growth of the economy. And with Mr. Setekbe's graph as he presented to Parliament, you can begin to see that the economy is growing at a reducing speed. That's a point that is being made. And if we pay attention to the solutions, I believe we will all be better off.
Thank you very much, Kojo Opong Nkrumah. And let's hear from Isaac Adon. He represents the NDC and is the parliamentary candidate for the Bolga Central constituency. That's supposed to be, okay, right, that's not where, Dominic Ayene's constituency. Now, already, the government is throwing out some responses and seeking to wholesale discredit everything, almost everything that Dr. Bawumia has been dealing with. Imani has done something we'll go into where they are able to give what they say is the real and truthful measurement of the things that he had to say. And they say some of the statistics are correct. Some of the comments that he made represent the truth on the ground, yet some of them he seemed to have, twisted them for a political purpose, partisan political purpose. What particularly in his presentation is the NDC feeling or the government feeling is completely wrong?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to my colleague panelists and good morning to your cherished viewers, particularly my constituents, Bolga Central constituency. I think that we in the NDC are consistently now getting worried about the comedy of Dr. Bawumia. Bawumia is not doing any economic analysis. Bawumia is actually doing a political campaign. And so we don't expect Bawumia to go out there and paint a good picture of this economy. Otherwise, he doesn't deserve to come back there. And so it is quite clear that the objective of Bawumia is to find a way and demonize anything good that this government has done. Okay. And indeed,
I don't intend to be interjecting. Yeah, but what I'd like you to do is this. No, yes. Just hold on. What I'd like you to do is this: that let's also be careful the words we use and expressions we use. No. When you begin by saying his comedy and stuff.
Dr. Akufo said it was very entertaining. Okay, this economics is a serious matter.
You see, there are platforms where let me
make my point. Let me make my point. Let me make my point. Yes, we are very serious about some of the things he has said. Okay. Some of the obvious distortions. You don't expect us to be happy with that.
I'm okay if you say obvious distortions.
Yeah, there are obvious distortions.
But you say comedy, that's wrong.
But yes, of course. The first thing I want to say is that what Dr. Bawumia has realized is that he is on a political campaign trail. He's come to realize after His Excellency the President delivered that speech in Cape Coast that so much focus was being paid to the volume of work that has been done by this government. So much effort was being made to let people know what exactly we were heading as a country. And so now seeing that beginning to sweep across the country, he had to find a way to, present this kind of analysis that is not factual. Most of his figures are self-seeking, and most of his figures are pure propaganda to put the NDC in bad light in order to project the MPP. So that is the first point. He's not a neutral, independent academic scholar making a presentation. So we need to know that from the first point. The issues he raised are quite fundamental.
So demonstrate beyond the comments.
Yeah, demonstrate beyond the comments. In the first place, Bawumia says that the debt to GDP okay, reduced significantly to 32%. 32% in which year? Not in 2008. Read page 96 of the 2009 budget. The budget deficit to GDP was 52%. So straight away, Bawumia is churning out a lie. The second point that tells you that Bawumia is churning out a lie is that Bawumia, in one breath, says that the total debt of Ghana is $36 billion, $39 billion, but then gets a CD equivalent of 105 billion Ghana cedis. Just multiply 3 by 39, you exceed 105. Okay, and dash him the 0.9 of a dollar. You're already getting a figure far in excess of the 105 that he's quoting and using for his analysis. So right away, he's just being mischievous and quoting figures that are not realistic. Let me make another point. I can tell you, Bawumia says that by the end of this year, Ghana would have borrowed $6 billion more. Okay, how do you accumulate debt? You accumulate debt by first looking at your budget deficit. And what is the budget deficit situation for 2016? 8.4 billion Ghana cedis. Translate that and you are getting $2.1 billion. So the additional $4 billion that Bawumia is getting, what is it for? Where is that going? It tells you that what Bawumia is simply doing is that anytime he sees a loan, a facility is taken, or a loan is taken, or there's a debt, what Bawumia simply does is to add all of that to the existing debt. So for instance, if the government of Ghana goes out to issue a Eurobond of $1 billion and intends to use $500 million to pay off an existing debt, you expect that the debt position should increase by only $500 million. Bawumia will add $1 billion to the debt position, inflating it by $500 million. And that is why there is an excess over $13 billion in excess of the official position. So Bawumia, what he's simply doing is, hey, tomorrow you are going to borrow some money. How much is it? 5 billion. Are we going to use it to finance existing debt? Bawumia is not interested. All Bawumia is interested is that we are borrowing 5 billion and that must be going to add up to the national debt. That is not a way to manage the debt position of Ghana, and that is not the way you account for debt position. And so it is quite clear that he's just churning out lies. Let me give you several other examples. Bawumia, in one breath, tells us that the foundation that we are building is a foundation of straw. Then immediately after that, he exposes himself by saying that the economy is projected to grow by double digits in 2018, just 2 years from now. Which foundation is it that is going to lead to the economy growing by double digits? All the economic think tanks across the country agree that Ghana is poised for 7% growth and beyond 2017, a further double digits. So he's confirming exactly the foundation that he's trying to discredit. And his own speech exposes him. Okay, what is Bawumia saying about infrastructure? In 2008, what was the total budget for infrastructure? 1 billion. Okay, the total amount of divestiture proceeds, selling our national assets alone, if that was to be used to finance infrastructure, that would have already met the 1 billion. In fact, exceeded the 1 billion. Ghana Telecom, Westel, okay, if you add DODA grants of another 1 billion to it, if you add HIPIC inflows, if you add the $750 million that was borrowed by the NPP, you were already getting an amount of $3 billion that could finance 3 times the capital expenditure of NPP in 1 year. And these are not even funds that you were sweating to get. These are selling our own asset and investing in our own capital. Where did the money go? Okay, and so for him to be talking about capital investment, and knowing that in terms of capital investment, the record is far, far better. And you could see it. You see, he's trying to say that we are not investing. I mean, the infrastructure that people are talking about, that he's scared about. How do I diminish the fire on the infrastructure that is going on? But he was caught there.
Actually talks about some mystery money.
No, he didn't. Let me
because
make
we
my
don't know where it's going.
Really. Let me make that point clear. You see, he contradicts himself. Bawumia says that we are overinflating figures and we are spending so much on infrastructure. Then in the end, he comes to quote a very small infrastructure amount that we have spent, $7 billion.
Right.
And so that's $7 billion compared to all that he's quoted. And then he just mentions about 4 projects and he gets $1 billion already. And yet Atuabo is not in. Okay. And he himself, in his campaign promise, when he happily said that there was a budget, a capital budget of 1.6 billion that he would draw on to distribute 1 million to constituencies so that MP people can share, he forgot that the 1.6 billion that he's putting there is for capital infrastructure.
Okay.
Let me make it. Is the 10 minutes up?
Again, no, hold
so
on,
let
hold
me.
on, hold on.
There,
Your
there
time
are
is
series
not up.
of things,
I have time for you. Hold
yeah.
on. And again, let me state that on this platform, we ought to be careful about some of the things we say. You don't know who is listening to you at this time. The NPP has a promise of one constituency, $1 million. The promise is not $1 million for NPP to share in the constituency. It is for the development of the constituency.
Let's grant him that.
So if you are making that reference, please make it in the factual
Let me grant him that. All I'm saying is that 1 billion that he's trying to take from the 1.6 billion, $1 million that he's trying to take out of the 1.6 billion capital expenditure, okay, he has forgotten that the massive infrastructure development that is going on across the country that he's trying to demonize, and which is saying that when you engage in investment of, engage in infrastructure, it means nothing, okay? But when he got to Rose, that he has a few examples, he found his voice. We saw how excited, you saw how excited. It means he knew that he didn't have a track record in infrastructure. When he got to water, he was so excited to be mentioning some examples because he knows that is the game changer. That is when you would then be building the competitiveness, you'll be investing into the future, and you'll be creating room for Ghana to grow. And so it is very clear that he is worried about the volume of infrastructure development. How do I throw dust into the eyes of the people that doesn't exist? And that's what he's doing. But we are very clear in our minds. When he came to give examples of inflated figures for hospitals, Bawumia mentioned a teaching hospital with a 600 bed capacity. Another rich hospital with 420 bed capacity. I have two issues. I wish he had found an example of a similar hospital that was built by NPP, okay, in order to show that it was cheaper in NPP, but now expensive. He couldn't find an example. 8 years, he couldn't find an example.
So you are not discounting what he said about the cost in the Lagos hospital, which he says these are private individuals who got into it or private institutions who got into it, and the amount is how many times what you are using for
all I'm trying to say is
you're not discounting that.
I'm discounting. I said there are two issues. I mentioned
you
one.
Wish he had an example.
I said there are two issues that I have with. The first one is that I wish he had his own example. He didn't have. The second issue is that Bawumia reduces the cost of a hospital to the number of beds that you have. So for him, once it is a 1,000-bed capacity hospital, it must necessarily be more expensive than a 400-capacity bed hospital, without looking at the scope, without looking at the facilities, without looking at what is going into the hospital. And that is my worry. My worry is that
he gave you sort of some standard.
What is the standard? What is the standard?
He talks about
that is Bawumia's standard.
And he talks about renovation of airport. And he goes to other countries to give you standard examples, what is happening elsewhere.
When he came to the airports, he used Tamale Airport as an example and used that of Ho. Ho is not supposed to be an international airport, right? Also used Ethiopia. Now, let me give you, let me come home. We are going, people are not here. A lot of people don't know Ethiopia. Let's stay here. Ho is not an international airport. When you build an international airport, it's not a runway. Why is Bawumia being so sarcastic that he pretends that it is just an expansion of a runway? The fact that an aircraft landed in the afternoon in the Tamale airport doesn't mean that aircraft at that time could have departed in the night. It doesn't mean that it could have landed there in the night. That is the difference. And so the difference now is that bigger aircraft can land and depart in the night because there are navigation and other facilities that are part of the airport. So why is he citing, comparing mangoes with oranges?
Okay.
In order to paint a picture, there are several other things that he's mentioned that are probably
like Kojo, you have done your time a bit, and I allowed all of you to do it so that we can speak about. Yes, I've seen you've made some notes. You come back.
No, but I have a lot of issues that he's raised that I would have wished to go on with.
We'll do the fact checking because
that,
some of the issues you raise may appear to be a general, overview of things. So we'll do the fact checking. We mentioned the specific issues, and you tell us what is wrong with them. Exactly. The figures that he puts out. Now, Doc, from where you sit, and this is your job, you listen to Dr. Bawumia and I can see you are looking at the script itself or whatever it is. What do you think he was sincere with, and what do you think he was insincere and inaccurate about for purposes of political propaganda?
Well, thank you, and good morning to your cherished listeners. I think the beauty of Dr. Bawumia's presentations over the last 3-4 years is to get all of us debating and shaping the political discourse, the campaign, making it more issue-based than other rhetorics and other things that do not bring about development. And I think, for me, that alone is a plus for him. I mean, if you listen carefully to the presentation, you could see that the presentation is full of facts. Of course, you can argue that somehow he's a politician, so you can see some turns and twists here and there. But largely, you realize that it is issue-based. And what he sought to do is to kind of have a comparative study and also look at trend analysis, put the data as it is now in historical perspective, and do
so you
a
say
comparison.
full of facts,
yes,
but twists and turns.
Yeah, that there are some level
so
of
give us examples of where you're dealing with facts that are irrebuttable, so to speak, and where you thought he twisted the facts.
Well, I mean, let's ask the question that, assuming that this time around we have IMF coming to do a diagnosis of our economy, or we have the World Bank produce a report on Ghana's macroeconomic conditions today, or let's say we have any of the credit agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, I mean, doing assessment, would they have presented anything different from the fact that, talking about the fact that we have debt stock increasing, debt to GDP as of 2015 being at 71.2%. We have interest rate being one of the highest. The fact that inflation still remains very high. The fact that GDP is on a downward trend. These are facts. They are empirically verifiable. You can go and check, all right? So there's very little that you can say about them. If you talk about debts, by 2009, our debt stock being about 9 billion. And today, if you look critically at the data, it's about 26 billion, $26.5 billion in that respect. This is facts, and this, you can hardly dispute that. Dr. Bawumia spoke about the fact that the previous regime, that is the MPP regime, actually received just about 20 billion Ghana cedis compared to 240-something billion that has been received, 248 that have been received during the NDC regime. It's interesting. I mean, in terms of magnitude, you know, fine, it has increased. You can clearly see that that's a quantum jump, you know. But one can also argue that this is only on nominal basis. You're looking at the nominal increase, but not really the real increase.
What does that mean?
Well,
because,
I mean,
his example to the ordinary person is quite understandable and believable.
Right.
Since you do not dispute that fact,
that
what the NDC has received over the period of 8 years or close to 8 years is 12 times what the NDC received. And yet, Bawumia says, you cannot see on the ground infrastructure development and the economic situation of the people any better than what used to be under the amounts referred to.
Yes, I think this is it's a common truth. I mean, if you look at the resources that have come in, the fact that we have discovered oil within the period, if you look at the borrowing alone, that if you check data, between 2009 and now, the government has added about $17 billion, more than $17 billion. And that is more than what existed by 2009. So that alone will tell you that more resources have come in. Revenue to GDP. My issue is, if you only look at the nominal revenue and without controlling for prices, because within the period, prices have increased, you know, inflation has gone up. So if you really want to do the actual goods and services that 20 million can buy compared to 246, you know, you probably have to control for prices. But even that, if you look at one way of also deflating is to do it over the GDP. Okay, take the 20 billion over the GDP at the time, and then the 246, as Kojo said, over GDP now, and then you see in relative terms which one is higher. Now, after the rebasing, our revenue to GDP actually fell to 11%, around 11 to 12%, our revenue to GDP. Now, consistently, our revenue to GDP has been increasing, and today it's about 17 point something percent. So in terms of relativity, in terms of comparing, you can clearly see that more revenue, because with the larger base, and you are still being able to grow the revenue stream to about 17%, then it tells you clearly that more money has come in, even if you are not talking about inflation and all the other things. So that alone could clearly tell you that more resources have come in compared to that period. So I don't have a problem about that. The issue about the debt to GDP being 73, and some also arguing that it's 63. 71, 63. It's interesting. It depends on what kind of information that you want to put out there. If you look at how Dr. Bawumia calculated his, he actually looked at up to May. What is the debt accumulation up to May? Now, up to May, there's also a level of GDP that the country has reached. So to actually tell the story as to what is the actual state of our debt stock to GDP, then it is only fair that you take it up to that time, that is the May ending, by because the Ghana Statistical Service actually have figures for April ending. You know, so we know by how much the GDP has grown from 2015 to the first quarter of the year. So you can really tell. And then how much you have accumulated up until that time. So when you do that, that is what gives you the 72%. Okay. Then someone also want to argue that, okay, what is the GDP projection for the year? Okay, for the entire year. So you do the GDP projection and you get certain figure. That gives you the ability to pay. You know, it gives you the absorptive capacity of the economy to absorb whatever debt that comes in. So your repayment and your absorptive capacity are very important. Then you increase the base, and then you end the debts at May. Now, the problem is, unless you're saying that between May and December, you're really not going to add on to debt stock, then of course you are right, very much the case, okay? But if you, from May to end of December, you'll still be increasing, then of course you find out that it will not be, you cannot really compare, you know, from what was the level there, because the base will not have changed. So it's important that the base changes.
Would you agree with Dr. Bawumia when he says, effectively, all of this boils down to incompetence in the management of the economy? He talks about corruption. He actually gives the impression to the ordinary person to expect that there ought to have been an equal measure of developmental projects, and that we ought to have seen an economy where the people are more excited about, you know, life.
Well, of course, Dr. Bawumia is a politician, so he's free to use certain words, which I would not use, although I concede the fact that the economy or the macroeconomic condition is challenged. I mean, it's almost in crisis. And therefore, if the economy is anything to go by, then one would say that just as Fitch, just as Moody, just as the IMF will describe the economy, that the economy today is not one of the best. Because if you do a comparative country analysis, even if you compare it to our own sub-region, the ECOWAS, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, interest rates about 15%, Ghana is about 30%, inflation much lower, and tax rates and all that. So we are really in a difficult economic condition. That we need to admit. Several factors can explain that. You know, you're looking at the fact that, I mean, the chunk of it actually, if you want to be objective, comes from what happened prior to 2012 election. Right. I mean, where we overspent, we engaged in huge deficit spending, and that took our debt budget deficit to GDP to about 12%.
The refrain has been that was reckless spending.
Yeah, I mean, everyone admit to that. I mean, international community and all that, because that shouldn't have happened. Because if you look at the year prior to that, it's one of the best years that we have ever recorded. That is 2011, having the budget deficit of about 4%, and then having 2-year consecutive double-digit inflation. So that was one of the best. So what really went wrong? So definitely certain things might have triggered that. You know, reckless spending, as you rightly mentioned, and then not keeping our eye on the debt stock. Okay, and then the central bank's own financing of government budget deficit is largely to be blamed for many of the problems that, because at that time the central bank financing actually reached about 32% thereabout.
And central bank finances, sorry, you mean the Bank of Ghana?
Yeah, purchasing government instruments, you know, which in layman's language we can say Bank of Ghana printing money to finance. Yeah, you know.
Okay.
I mean, that is quite technical though. But
I can understand why people wanted you to get down.
No, but not exactly that.
The technical word.
Right.
People don't get the real report of what
I get it.
So that was the more reason why the IMF, the ECF program actually was quite strict on this central bank financing, saying that we can.
A deputy minister of finance, Ato Folsom, says what Bawumia did was sheer propaganda, and that he engaged in, let me quote him, he said he engaged in, he was insincere about the manner he went about it. He spoke about, let me say exactly what he sought to say. The question of averages has already come up, which he felt that is what ought to have been done. But could you speak to that? He says that he was dealing in, he calls something figures, and I want to make a reference without getting into any trouble. Okay. Right, I'll look for some of the words he used to describe what Bawumia did. But he says this boils down to propaganda. What do you have to say?
Thank you. You know, figures may be disputed, you know, and the implications of the figures for economic development and all these things may also be argued. But the point is that policy choices have different outcomes. The policy choices of the NDC and the MPP have not been very different. They are the same, in the sense that all of them are what you might call monetarist. They deal with inflation and the deficits by a monetary approach. And that is a failure of an appreciation of the structure of our economy, what leads to the deficits, and so on. But it is significant to point out that in pursuing those policies, they are pursuing the interest of foreign interest, of foreign financial interest. And that will not bring any benefit and prosperity to our country. Our country is serving foreign interest. One, these deficits that the economy experiences are not transient. They are structural. They are a colonial implant. It is something that has been planted by the colonial structure of the economy. And it is this. One, colonialism in the formation of your economy, one, made sure that you applied your land resource to the supply of his raw material to feed his industries. He made it a single commodity, cocoa. Now, that is a structure of you be a commodity-dependent economy having deficits built in because, one, you buy low, he denies you industrialization and the ability to manufacture goods of high value. So you buy high, you sell low. That is the structure of your economy. No industrialization, commodity export, single commodity export, and what the outcome will be is what we all call external shocks, because there will be fluctuation in your export earnings. And when you have export, you have external shocks, which is fluctuation in your export earnings. You by all means have a deficit. And you are buying high, you are selling low, you will have a deficit. So what is the answer? The answer of the NDC and the MPP is reduce government expenditure. Let's borrow. Let's raise taxes. Roll back the involvement of government in economic development planning and development. We have done that for 32 years. It has not worked. And they think that this is the key to promote growth. It has not worked. Our people have become poorer. There's massive unemployment. So what are they doing? It is a wrong appreciation of the problem and wrong prescription. What they need to do, which the CPP has recommended and did in the First Republic, is the structural transformation of the economy. We are structuralists. We are not monetarists. So, we believe in industrialization so that we can reduce our import expenditure. We believe in the diversification of the export sector away from commodities. So we embarked on industrialization. Now, what did the NDC and the MPP do?
Mr. Duncan, when you look at Dr. Bawumia's presentation, and when I began the questioning by referring to what government has had to say, for example, when government says he relied on faulty data, we want you to assist our audience from where you sit and your understanding. Did he rely on faulty data? The government response is that he ignored the facts in his analysis. Did he ignore any facts? He picked and chose data. Is that what you find in the presentation he did?
Samson, the significant point, whether he chose the wrong data or he chose the right data, we are looking as politicians the impact of our policies on the people. And that is what I want to address and tell your audience.
We want to analyze the true state of Ghana's economy. And that's what he sought to do. we want to help our audiences to understand if he really presented the true facts.
I don't think that is pertinent. I don't think that is really pertinent, because if it's a matter of figures, there are so many ways of dealing with figures. He pointed out how Dr. Bawumia had dealt with the figures, double counting, placing, if like an accountant, if he wants to draw you a balance sheet, he can draw you one that makes it good, hide certain things in some places. It is still admissible. So that is not the contentious issues here now. And I pray that we behave like politicians responsible for social policy and prosperity of our nation. And that we are not going to, figgle or double with figures, 10% here, 5% here. Already, Kojo has already mentioned that. We are not going to, fiddle with 0.2%, 0.1% here. It makes no difference. And particularly also with the question of GDP growth. They have been quibbling about it. Oh, it's 7%, is this, is this, is this. You can have growth that is not fairly distributed.
Jobs.
You can have growth without jobs. You can have growth where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Unfair distribution. And all these are questions of policy choices that I want us to address.
Okay.
And I would like to say something about Kojo's thing, that if it is neoclassical or Keynesian, you come to the same point. No, you don't. These will affect your policy choices. And if you're a neoclassical, you go austerity. If you're monetarist, you go austerity. Cut your costs according to your size, balance your budget, and until you do that, you are not ready for a takeoff. And that has been presented. I remember Kojo did an interview with me at the Parliament House some time ago, and this issue came up. Doing one of the budgets.
Yes.
And it was an MPP budget, and then they said, oh, now we are ready for a takeoff. The takeoff has never happened.
Okay. We will take a break here, and then when we return, we'll take reactions. Kojo has made some notes, and he will speak to them. But when we return, we'll deal with some very specifics, and I'll be relying heavily on the analysis that have been done by Imani. Imani, for example, says that Dr. Bawumia's claim that non-performing loans have risen from 11.2% in May 2015 to 19.2% in May 2016. And he says major banks are in trouble. He says some banks are going to collapse if something serious is not done. Imani has issues with that. It says, for example, that this is another of those situations where Dr. Bawumia makes use of actual facts but strips them out of context to point to the point where some of the saliency in his argument is lost. We'll come and deal with those other issues. We'll be right back after this break.